Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. What's the difference between thinking and praying, between dieting and fasting, between spending and almsgiving? My friend David Bonagura joins us. David is the author most recently of 100 Tough Questions for Catholics, Common Obstacles to Faith Today. He's a translator of Jerome's Tears, Letters to Friends in Mourning, and an adjunct professor at St. Joseph's Seminary and Catholic International University, prolific author, speaker, thinker, and commentator. David, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Hello, Marcus. Happy Lent to you.
Blessed Lent to you, my friend. Blessed Ash Wednesday. So, have you already heard some of the criticisms that Catholics virtue signal on Ash Wednesday?
Oh, yes. All the fun thing with the hashtag and all
that. Hashtag.
It's great to virtue signal for something that's completely worthless and meaningless, which is the ash on our forehead, which is precisely the point, of course, that we are eventually become dust, which is utterly meaningless and not pointless, but our bodies will become pointless to a degree once they're in the earth, and everything else on this earth will become pointless. But it's our souls that go to live on, and Lent is the time not to virtue signal, but to develop virtue so that we may be capable of living the life that Christ calls us to.
You know, I made this point earlier in the program, and I'd like you to speak deeper into it, that the Church, Christ himself, and therefore the Church, actually tells us to not parade our good works, to not parade our merits, our talents, our rewards, our blessings, but every Ash Wednesday she tells us, but parade your penitence. Make sure the world sees that you are actually trying to repent.
But it is kind of odd, right? The juxtaposition of the gospel reading for today in the Gospels. But the ashes are not meant to show our religiosity in any sort of sense. They're meant to encourage us, to remind us of that we are sinners and that we have we got a lot of work to do if we want to have the promise of Easter glory. So it's not about, we put the ashes on our head not to show the world that how great we are, to remind ourselves of how much work we need. And if people need a reinterpretation of that, well, there it is.
And it truly is. It truly is. Because by taking the ashes upon our foreheads, even before we talk about the new life we're called to, let's just dive into that Catholic concept of death and the remembrance of death, which is uniquely Catholic.
Right, exactly. And the whole idea of here we are in Lent, and we begin today as Ash Wednesday, fasting and abstinence, and we're called to fast from additional things in addition to the minimum to the food and things. But what all those things do, the idea is there's a couple different levels of it, but one of them is emptying ourselves of these things which fill us, whether it be food or electronics or video games or television or news or what have you. Mm-hmm. They fill us. When we offer them up and we sacrifice them, we empty ourselves of them. And then the idea is then we can be filled with spiritual things. We're no longer weighed down by these things of the world. Our soul then can lift up and be lifted up toward God to contemplate Him. So there's a certain freedom that comes from sacrificing these things, from giving up these worldly things, which really can be just chains that drag us down. And I know I feel this all the time. I got to go check this, I got to do that, and then all of a sudden I feel frazzled and tired and stressed. And none of those things are the works of the Spirit. They're all things that are worldly things that, of course, maybe they need to be done, but unless I find the right mode and intention in which I could do those things, they end up being counterproductive to my salvation because I'm not using them to elevate myself to God. Rather, I'm just becoming full with myself and full with whatever the moment is in its purely earthly context.
And what you've just shared stands in stark contrast with the way the world wants us to power through, forget the liturgical calendar, just the fiscal calendar, right? That our merit, our value is based on how productive we've been over the course of a period of time, whether it's a year or a month, what have you.
Right. Everything is measured these days in monetary terms. So as working, healthy people, we have to produce or, we're not worth anything. And then, of course, we get to the end of life and we're not producing anymore. In fact, we're consuming immense amount of resources of healthcare and that sort of thing, and people's time and energy in order to help us around. Boy, it's not a wonder then with this kind of an ethos and this kind of a worldview, why there are now, I forget the exact number, I believe we're up to 14 states now that allow for assisted suicide. the code word medical aid in dying, which is a whole bunch of nonsense, of course. But the idea that the person is a burden. He's no longer an economic machine. He's taking away precious resources, so therefore we should just get rid of him. It's a terrible, terrible worldview that's dominated by just a need for profit for things and a denial of the Spirit and denial of God.
And what's terrifying about exactly what you just shared, too, is the evil one couches that language in compassion, in a false, misplaced charity that this is actually what it means to die with dignity. Can you please speak to that? Because then I want to draw it back to that's what we're doing this season.
Isn't that the worst phrase that the other side uses, the death with dignity? It's terrible. There's no dignity in taking your own life. There's dignity in submitting oneself to whatever God has in store for us, no however painful or ugly even it may get in the last moments or days of someone's life. But there's no dignity in asserting one's power over God. Quite the opposite. Jesus' whole message is one of humility and submission. True dignity is found with Jesus on the cross when he submitted to the Father's will. And when we do the same, that's where we find our dignity, which again is totally counter to any sort of message that's running in our culture or secular culture these days.
And thereby, when we talk about this concept of actual death and dying with dignity, which corresponds to living with dignity, that's what the season of Lent is actually all about.
Right, to die to self and to our selfish wants. I'm pretty hungry right now. It's 5:30 and all that. But to have to use prayer to move beyond my selfish desires and to let that part of me, again, the term we use is giving up stuff, is mortification, making the body die in the sense of making its desire for fulfillment, and certainly its sinful desires, to try to put those desires to rest, to put them to death, so that we can then instead fill with spiritual desires, with heavenly things. And it's something that's a constant battle. It's not something like, okay, I gave up this or that for Lent, and poof, I'm good, and I don't feel any more temptation or any more pulls for any of these things. No. Every day, every minute, every hour is a struggle, and that's just the way the Christian life is. It's a battle, and the imagery that the prayers that we have for Mass today really point to that. Christian discipline is a term that was used right in the opening prayer there, that we go to use these weapons of fasting and self-denial in order to obtain a greater end, to win a battle. That is, to win a battle against the devil and a battle against the flesh and a battle against the world, so that we can live in union with Christ slowly but surely in this life, and then ultimately in the next, after death.
And that thereby draws us to that conversation of intentionality behind the act. Sure, you can think of your fasting as a way to get fit and a way to lose weight, but the core driving intent needs to be there, or the action loses its intended purpose.
Right, exactly. So we can all think about it. Today we abstain, Ash Wednesday we abstain from meat, but a person could abstain from meat for any other reason. Right? Maybe he's vegetarian, or maybe he just didn't feel like eating meat. He felt like having fish instead for whatever the reason. So that person then is coincidentally observing the Catholic Lenten fast, but is not actually observing the fast because he doesn't know intention in doing so. So how we direct our efforts is what we do. So if we giving up, say, the internet or websites or something like that for Lent, I mean, you could say, I'm not going to go to X website for Lent. Well, you could do that on any other day. Well, what makes it special that you're giving up? Well, you intend. I say, I'm not going this not because I'm too busy or because I don't feel like it. I'm not going to this website because I'm offering it as a sacrifice for God. Poof. By making that intention and turning that intention into a prayer, that's how we make our fasting meaningful, not just something that we do, like all the other things that we do with the course of the day, sometimes even without thinking, but something that we do for God, and we do it, it's His will that's driving us, and we are conscious of that consciously.
My guess is David Bonagura. He's a prolific author, speaker, thinker, no stranger to this program. Recently penned a piece called Intention Makes the Sacrifice on Catholic World Report. And that's what we're talking about, intentionality in the Lenten sacrifice. Continuing on the other side. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm talking with David Bonagura. He is a prolific author and commentator. Most recently, he penned this article on Catholic World Report, Intention Makes the Sacrifice. David is also the author of the book, 100 Tough Questions for Catholics, Common Obstacles to Faith Today. David, you were just walking us through the concept of intentionality, and it was a beautiful, succinct job you did. But I want to ask you to recap that for those joining us in this segment, that what we do in Lent matters not just because we do it in Lent, but because our intention behind it is ordered to an end that's greater than ourselves.
Exactly. So what we do is we could do things for the sake of doing it, or we could shape what we do with a right intention. So the example we used right at the beginning was, okay, what's the difference between dieting and fasting? I think everyone intuitively knows the difference. Dieting, we use different, it's the same action, right? We abstain from food in both instances. But dieting we do for the self, and fasting we do for God. And even the very different vocabulary words there show us the different ends. It's the intention that matters. So when we do things for God, that's when I'm offering my sacrifice, my worship of Him. So as we go through this Lenten season here, being day 1 of 40, we can think of things, all sorts of things that we can fast from, all sorts of sacrifices we can make, and we do them simply by virtue of making that prayer, of saying, I'm going to offer this up, I'm going to pass on this, I'm not going to have this as an act of penance or to show my love for you, God. And when we do those things, the thing sometimes doesn't even leave the store shelf. If you're walking by and say, oh, gee, I usually buy donuts, say, when I'm in the store on Tuesdays, and, I'm going to offer up my donuts this week or this Lenten season. Nothing happens, right? The donuts just sit on the shelf. They don't move. But by the fact that we've made a prayer out of it and expressed our intentions to God, we've done something beautiful for Him. We've offered Him an act of worship, an act of sacrifice. So our intention is really what helps shape our Lent, provided that we do something. We're all familiar with that phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's implied for people who don't do anything. We're talking to people who are doing things, and how can I hate to use the secular term, but how can they optimize, get a return on investment, spiritual return on investment, that is, of what it is that they're doing. And that is by making the intention. Again, you make the intention by means of offering a prayer, spontaneous prayer to God, and say, Lord, I offer this to you out of love for you in reparation for my sins, and hope that I can love you more. Boom, that's it. And we've just transferred a mundane action into a spiritual one.
Now, you also raise another crucial point, which is sometimes these sacrifices, well-intentioned and grounded in prayer, can have ancillary benefits, like we touched on earlier, the losing of weight, or better mental clarity, what have you. Can you walk us through the fact that that's a good thing, that we don't have to shy away from it because of that?
Correct, right? So if your primary motivation is Lent, it's okay, every Lent I give up X, Y, or Z foods, and then usually I'll end up dropping 5 pounds as a result of that, and sure, I might be happy at that. That's fine. That's okay. You don't have to be, because the reason why you're ditching the food is in order to please God and to satisfy the Lenten requirements. It's not primarily to lose weight. If losing weight is a byproduct of that, okay, that's great. But again, that's not the primary intention. The primary intention is to serve God. And you can branch that out and make it just a little bit bigger. When we do good things in general, there are side effects. There are good other things unintended that ripple through family, through society, through the world, through the invisible world of the spirit. So that's normal that we experience benefits, and if we're doing good spiritual things, we should expect good benefits in the material order and certainly in the spiritual order. As long as those aren't our primary motivators for doing what we're doing, then all well and good.
And so let's refocus that then, because we've been talking so far about the ashes as a symbol of death and mortality, quite frankly, mortification, putting the body to death. But the Catholic doesn't just look at ashes and think death. In fact, we're rather odd. We look at the ashes and think death and also life.
Exactly, right? Because what the beginning of Lent is death, the culmination of Lent is Good Friday, and then the end of Lent is Easter Sunday. So it begins with death, it ends in death, but that death is Christ's death, which is transformative. It's the death that brings life and life to the world, eternal life. So we're not this is not a weird sort of Halloween that we're engaging in here as Catholics in Lent and talking about, remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return, to focus on death, so memento mori. the reason why we focus on death is because it harnesses the power of life, and it reminds us, if we say memento mori, think about death, well, it reminds us that death is going to come, and we need to make sure we live to the full, but at the same time, what comes after death? Eternal life. So death is really it's a punishment for sin, it's something we all dread and all that, but it's also a transition for a believer. It's a means from going from one state of relationship with God to another. And keeping that in mind is what Lent helps us to do very, very well.
And so what you're effectively saying is we have to keep the end in mind, begin with the end in sight. We've talked about this before in terms of the language of teleology. Can you help us refocus that?
Yeah, so when we're talking about the giving things up and having the intention, what is the intention of action? What's the goal? So teleology, or telos, is the Greek word for the goal of something. What are we doing it for? All these, it's easy to get bogged down and forget. Why do I have to do all this fasting stuff? I can't eat meat today, all that. I have to go to the stations across the Friday. Why? All these things. We say, well, what's the end of them? The end is union with God. And what does union with God require? Well, it requires us to die to ourselves, that mortification, die to our selfish desires and certainly our sinful desires, and to turn ourselves toward Him and to embrace Him and to live how He wants us to do. So when we keep the goal in mind, which is union with God, we can make sure our intentions for what we're doing are ordered toward that. And you have the big goal in mind, and then you make the little goals. Okay, I'm going to give this up. I'm going to do that activity, or I'm going to go to the stations across, and so on. And doing all these things are little steps. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Little steps along the way to that ultimate goal with the union with God.
The other thing that this naturally challenges, as you rightly highlight in your article, is that it forces us to stop thinking about ourselves. And gosh, our world feeds our radical individualism and self-indulgence.
Exactly, because if we're not thinking about ourselves, we're not going to buy anything. We need to buy things to keep the GDP running, but that's not how we think in terms of Lent. And that's where, again, the intention is really important, because naturally when we empty ourselves of things, food, drink, what have you, we feel the lack of them. And so self-pity can very quickly become a feature of one's Lent. And prayer and intention is what helps us combat that. Every pang of hunger, we need to respond to that with the prayer. The hunger pangs aren't going away. If you're not hungry, you're not doing Lent right. So the question is, can we turn those things not into moments of self-pity, but into moments of submission to God, of saying, I offer this for you, you who suffered for me. You had more than hunger pangs on that cross. I can follow you. I can endure this for you because you endured so much for me. Teach me to follow you through my suffering. These are the tools of the Christian disciple. These are the prayers that we have to use to accompany our fasting and our other works of sacrifice, the things that we're giving up, so that we can reap the full spiritual benefits of this fantastic season of Lent, which is just such a great gift of the church. We need it so badly. I need this year. I need it more than I did last year. I think last year I need before. And the more I dread it, actually, it's kind of a twofold street for me. The more I dread Lent, the more I know that I need it. Because I got things I got to clean up and got to break free of.
And like you mentioned, we ought to be looking forward to Lent as needing it more this year than I did the last. And that's why we ought to look forward to Lent the way a soldier looks forward to conditioning.
Right, exactly. Or even maybe not, but knowing what the benefit is at the end. So I don't love the fasting and all the other things. It's not the funnest thing in the world, but I know what they're for, and I know then by the fact that I'm dreading that, doing these actions, I know that I need to rid myself of these things. These earthly things are weighing me down, that they're barriers toward union with God. The Carmelite tradition speaks of it as we need to detach ourselves from these earthly things, weigh us down like lead balloons. And in order for the spirit to rise to God, we have to be able to free ourselves from these things. And these things are not necessarily bad in themselves. Food, of course, is not bad in itself, nor any, if you're giving up coffee or tea or alcohol or what have you. Those things aren't bad in themselves, but our desire for them can just become like a lead chain that pulls us down rather than allowing ourselves to lift up to the Lord. So when we sacrifice these things. That's the great challenge of Lent, is in order to make that intention, to make that prayer, so that we can stay in union with him even when it's difficult.
And the difficulty is undoubtedly going to be there. So we've got about a minute left, David. You hit us with this language of difficulty. It's not like there are some of us, like David Bonagura, for example, for whom the season of Lent and the penitence is easy. No, all of us go through the crucible.
Right, exactly. Lent is hard, and it's supposed to be hard. If it's not hard, again, you're not doing something right. So embrace the hardness, and again, embrace the difficulty, not that it's going to be easy, and then use that as an opportunity to say, okay, this is a struggle. Lord, help me to struggle. You struggled up the Via Crucis to Calvary. Help me to struggle with my cross so that I can rise to new life with you, because that's what Lent is. It's not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. Lent is the means to Easter. That's where we all want to go. And so if we're going to get there, we need to follow the way the Master went, and that's through the way of suffering.
Well, that's about as powerful, sobering, and in some ways enticing and unenticing an exhortation. David, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Marcus. Have a great Lent.
You too. My guest has been David Bonagura. He's a friend, he's an author, most recently of 100 Tough Questions for Catholics, Common Obstacles to Faith Today. He has an article on Catholic World Report called Intention Makes the Sacrifice. And he really does exhort us to channel our hearts into the sacrifice we're choosing for Lent and to really commit to wanting to grow in holiness and all that entails. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marcus Peter.